In this video, we're going to be going over Unit 1 vocab for AP Microeconomics. So let's start off with our first question. If a binding price ceiling is imposed on gasoline, what will occur? So the answer is B, a shortage. And for this question, the vocab you need to know is, what is a price ceiling? A price ceiling is a legal max price sellers can charge, and it is only binding if it is set below the equilibrium, and that will cause a shortage. As you can see here on this price versus quantity graph and the supply and demand, we have 2 points here, and the price ceiling is below the equilibrium price here. So then when it's below, it's going to cause it to intersect with the demand curve and the supply curve at lower points. And this space in between, we're going to call this shortage. So it's going to be a shortage that it's going to cause. So a binding minimum wage will most likely cause what? So you need to know, what is binding minimum wage? Binding minimum wage is a form of a price floor because it provides a minimum that employers can provide their employees with. So this is going to be set below the equilibrium wage. And then that is going to cause unemployment. So as you can imagine here, we can draw this on a graph. So this is a price floor, which is the legal max, a legal minimum sellers can, or not sellers, sellers must receive, and in this case it is employers must provide. It is going to be binding if set above the equilibrium, and that's going to cause a surplus. So on our supply and demand here, you're going to have P and Q, and we're going to draw our price floor. If it's above, this is going to cause a surplus. And a surplus is going to cause a labor surplus. That's the equivalent here. Because in this case, we have more workers wanting a job than firms want to hire. A tax placed on a good will what? So for this, you need to know, what is a tax? So in econ, we define a tax to be a per unit charge imposed on buyers or sellers. And this creates a wedge between the buyer price and seller price. This in turn is going to reduce the quantity. So let's take, for example, a $2 tax per cigarette. So this tax is going to reduce the quantity of these cigarettes, and it's going to create deadweight loss, which is going to be this triangle. Now, a per unit subsidy will what? Oh, so the answer for this is going to be B. It's going to decrease the equilibrium quantity. A per unit subsidy will what? So a subsidy is a government payment to producers or consumers per unit. What it does is it increases supply and it increases quantity. So for example, we have the government paying farmers per bushel of wheat. So what you have is, your answer is going to be, it's going to attempt to increase the quantity. Our subsidy is going to increase supply and increase quantity. So what it's going to do is, our supply, it's going to shift our curve right. So this is our price and this is our quantity. It's going to increase our quantity. Now, if a tax increases from $2 to $10 and quantity falls dramatically, tax revenue will what? What is the definition of tax revenue? So tax revenue is going to be tax per unit times the quantity sold after tax. So for example, if you have a $5 tax times 100 units, that's going to equal to a $500 revenue. So here we have a tax that goes from 2 to 10, and our quantity is going to fall. So our answer is actually going to be C. It could possibly rise or fall, and this is dependent on the elasticity. Our elasticity is going to be how steep the curve is. If it's very vertical, if our demand or supply is very vertical, it's that one is going to change more. That one's not going to change as much. This is inelastic. You can remember the inelastic by looking at the eye, and elastic is more of a slope. Consumer surplus. Okay. So consumer surplus is the difference between what consumers are willing to pay and what they actually pay. So let's say that you buy a you are willing to pay $10 for food, but you pay $4. That's going to leave you with a $6 surplus. Consumer surplus is going to be always above the price and below the demand. So this is your graph. Price and your quantity, supply and your demand. Your up here is going to be, I'll actually color code this. So your consumer surplus is above the price and below the demand. Your producer surplus is the bottom of that triangle. So the answer for this question is going to be below the price and above the supply. That's the price. It's the Q. Producer surplus is the difference between price received and your minimum willingness to sell. Your firm willing to sell at $8 but receives $11, that's going to leave the firm with a $3 surplus. Deadweight loss occurs when what? So deadweight loss, the definition is the total surplus lost from inefficient quantity. So for example, you have tax reduces trade from 100 to 80. You're going to have lost gains from trade because less trade is going to be going on. So it prevents transactions that could have happened but are lost because the market was inefficient. So it occurs when your quantity deviates from the equilibrium. If the world is below the domestic price, a country will. So here, our vocab is domestic price. And also import. We'll actually focus on import being our vocab. So here, a domestic price is the price that is just in your domestic country. An import is buying a good from another country. So for example, it's US buying cars from Japan. So what's going to happen when the world price is below the domestic? A country will import because if your at-home prices are lower than, or the world price is lower than what it costs for you to buy something in your country, you're going to want to import things from other countries because buying in your home country is going to be more expensive. So consumers buy cheaper foreign goods. If the world price is above the domestic equilibrium, the country will what? So our answer is going to be export. An export is when you sell a good to another country. For example, that's the US selling soybeans to China. The reason why we are going to export when the world price is above the domestic equilibrium is because sellers realize that they can get a better deal and they can sell and receive a higher price when they have their final sale of their good to foreigners because they're willing to pay more. So that means that the producers are going to be encouraged to sell abroad for a higher price. Export is our vocab here. Now let's discuss what a tariff is. A tariff is when you have a fee on things that are imported. So a tariff is essentially a tax on imports. Briefly, let's add world price to our vocab as well. A world price is the price of a good on global market. So in general, let's define our rule again. So when you import, that means that the price of the world is less than the domestic. But when you have an export, the price of the world is greater than the domestic. Now, the functions of a tariff is that it is going to raise the domestic price because people are going to be forced to buy things that are inside of the country, and because of that, sellers can then increase their price because they know that these consumers, they have no other option but to purchase the products that are in the country and have to settle for whatever prices that the producers set. So it also is going to reduce imports because people are going to be discouraged to buy from foreigners and support foreign markets and prices because they're going to have to pay an additional import tax to the government in order to buy those goods. It also creates government revenue, and revenue is created for the government whenever they have a tax implemented on something. It also creates dead weight loss because you're going to lose out on trades that could have occurred if the market was more efficient and had not been affected by this tariff. For example, we can think of a $5 tax per unit on imported steel. As a result, people are going to look to buy U.S. steel instead of foreign steel, and sellers will increase their prices of U.S. steel in the U.S., and U.S. tax revenue will increase, and deadweight loss will be created from when the market is inefficient. Naturally, the market is the most efficient when there are no restrictions on it and you have a free market, because naturally things will go to whoever wants them the most and whoever values them the most and is willing to pay the most. Which of the following is a private good? So here our vocabulary is going to be private good. A private good is rival and also excludable. So here a private good is going to be pizza. For question 11, our answer was C. Increased government revenue. Now, let's go into our next question. Which of the following is a public good? So a public good is going to be non-rival and non-excludable. So this is going to be national defense. What of the following is a common resource? A common resource is going to be rival and non-excludable. So it cannot be prevented of being used by other people. It's, for example, fish in the ocean. You can just get a fish. A natural monopoly exists when... So a natural monopoly exists when only one firm can supply entire market So, for example, we have an electric utility company, and your answer is going to be B. So marginal cost is going to be our next vocab word. Marginal cost is the cost of producing one more unit. And it's going to determine your supply curve. Now, MB, marginal benefit. Marginal benefit is the additional benefit one more unit. And that's going to represent the demand curve. A negative externality occurs when... So externality is going to be when you have a cost or benefit imposed on a third party not involved in the transaction. So they're going to be affected, but they weren't a part of this exchange that occurred. So for example, a negative would be like when you have pollution. It's going to be a cost that the environment has to face, even though the environment wasn't in exchange in the purchase. So when you have pollution from a factory, that is something that is happening with the producer trying to produce something for the seller in order to produce a product. But that is going to cause a con, and it's going to hurt our environment, even though the environment wasn't directly involved. A positive example would be vaccines. Like, people would get vaccinated and it would prevent other people around them from getting sick. Even though the other people around them weren't involved in that transaction of getting a vaccine, they're still being protected and receiving the benefits of this person getting a vaccine, because they're not going to be able to get sick, and they're not going to be able to infect others, and they're able to live longer and able to contribute to the economy by being a healthy person. So let's move on to our next question. Positive is going to be vaccines. That's fine. So now we're going to discuss some of the concepts in AP Micro Unit 1. So let's talk about our first question. We are going to have a price ceiling set above the equilibrium price. Here our concept is going to be a price ceiling. A price ceiling, and we can split a price ceiling up into non-binding and binding. So if it is above equilibrium, it's going to be irrelevant. And for the price floor, if it's gonna be below the equilibrium, it's gonna be irrelevant. Now for a price ceiling, if it's below equilibrium, it's gonna cause change. And for a price floor, if it's above equilibrium, it's gonna cause change and bind. So a price ceiling set above price equilibrium is going to have no effect. It doesn't restrict equilibrium price. So let's say that the equilibrium rent is $1,500. And let's say the government sets a ceiling at $2,000. Well, if the best price for buyers and sellers, it's like at $1,500, this is going to have no effect, because why would the seller increase it if that's not the price that the buyer would meet them at? And why would buyers pay more when the equilibrium is currently lower? No one is just going to follow the ceiling. So that's just a max that can be paid, but people will still pay lower because there is going to be no legal consequence to paying lower and selling for lower. So let's talk about our binding constraints now. So a ceiling above the equilibrium is going to cause it to bind and create a shortage. And a floor above the equilibrium is going to create a surplus. For example, if you have minimum wage, so this is rent, and you have minimum wage here. So if you have a minimum wage that is set above your equilibrium, let's say this is your new minimum wage here, your original minimum wage was $7, and let's say it's increased to $10. This is going to create a surplus. There's going to be a surplus of workers, but not enough people who want to employ them. Now, a binding price floor causes a what? This is going to cause a surplus, because your quantity supplied is greater than your quantity demanded. Tax incidence is what we're going to talk about next. Tax incidence is how the burden of tax is divided between buyers and sellers. It's dependent on elasticity. The more inelastic side, it's going to pay more. And the elastic side is going to avoid tax. The reason for this is because if you're more inelastic, let's say you're the producer, right? If your supply is going to be, that means that if you're the producer, your supply is going to be more inelastic long run. So let's say you have a product that you're producing, and it's pretty fixed, the amount that gets output all the time. You are constantly producing a whole bunch of it, and the producer's demand is going to be relatively elastic, which means that it can change really easily, which meaning based off the price, it can go down, and if based on the price, if it increases, it can decreases, it can go up. So if you're very elastic, that means that you can respond to changes very easily. And you can change your behavior to be more beneficial to yourself. Because you can do that, it's going to make you take on less of the burden, because you're going to be responsible for less of it. And the other side, they just have to cope with it and just take on whatever the incident of tax is going to be. So for example, let's say that we are talking about gasoline. Gasoline demand is inelastic, because we as people, we always need to drive cars. You need cars to get to work, to go to school, and you're always going to need that. And for example, we can think of oil companies. Some oil companies will control how much oil they put out so that they can control the market price of the oil that they sell, so that they can make it higher and artificially get more profit by controlling how much quantity of oil there is in the market. So the consumer, they just have to go along with that. And because there is a fixed amount of that oil, they just have to, they always are going to need it. So they're just going to have to accept it. So the inelastic side, they just must accept reality. So yeah. So if the demand is more inelastic than a supply, who bears more tax burden? It's going to be B, the consumers. A subsidy is going to lead to what? So for this question, what you need to know is the topic of government intervention. So government intervention, it changes market outcome. So a tax is going to decrease your quantity, and then that's going to result in underproduction. Now, if you have a subsidy, that's going to increase your quantity, and that's going to result in overproduction. Now, if you have a tariff, this is going to increase your domestic price. And it's going to lead to overproduction because those consumers have to accept the producer price. So that means the producer is going to take advantage of that and produce more so that they can sell more, so they can get more of that profit, because they know that the consumer will buy those things that they're producing. And all of this, these are all restrictions. Restrictions are inefficient. And because they're inefficient, they're going to create deadweight loss, preventing things that would have happened, trades that would have happened if this was a fair, efficient market. So a subsidy is going to lead to C, overproduction. Deadweight loss is going to be larger when what? So for this question, you're going to need the concept of elasticity. So elasticity, it determines your tax burden, your size of deadweight loss, the impacts of tariffs, the effectiveness of subsidies as well. So if you are more elastic, that's going to be a large deadweight loss. If you're more inelastic, that's going to be a small deadweight loss. So for example, let's think of like luxury goods. For luxury goods, that's going to be a very elastic good, because it really depends on the consumer. Doesn't need to buy luxury goods to stay alive. They buy it based off of if there's a sale on this luxury good, or if they have a whole bunch of money all of a sudden. So when they don't need it, they just stop buying it, and when they need it, they can buy it. So it's very elastic, changes. So this is going to cause a big deadweight loss from tax. It's going to prevent a lot of transactions that would have occurred if there was a tax that was placed on luxury goods, because then people are going to be even more discouraged to buy them, and it's going to prevent even more transactions from occurring. So deadweight loss is going to be larger when C, the demand and supply are elastic, because that means that both the demand, the producers, both the supply, the producers, and the consumers of the demand, they can change their behavior very quickly, and then that will cause a lot of gap in the triangle. It will create a very large gap, lots of deadweight loss, because they both will just respond. Now, free trade. For this question, you're going to need the concept of benefits of trade. So you need to know that trade increases total surplus by allowing specialization based on comparative advantage. This means that consumers get lower prices, and also that producers access larger markets. So for example, US imports cheaper electronics. So from China, we have like phones that are very easy to produce and the price is low. So Americans will import those phones and it will allow the producers in China to have access to larger markets. So trade increases the total surplus by allowing specialization. So because China has the comparative advantage in producing those smartphones, the consumers can benefit from that, and they can buy those cheap devices, and China can also benefit from that by producing more, and because they have that comparative advantage, they can just produce more and just take in that profit because they know people are willing to buy theirs because they know it's cheaper than their domestic price. So free trade is going to increase your total surplus. It increases the total amount of phones that are produced because of the fact that foreigners will be able to buy those because there is no restriction on the trade. So, which of the following is excludable? So for this question, you need to know what an excludable good is. Excludable good. It is excludable if people can be prevented from using it. For example, let's take a movie ticket. A movie ticket is excludable because people can be prevented from using it by not buying it. If they don't buy it, they cannot get the movie ticket and go see the movie. But like air is not an excludable good because anybody can just breathe it, regardless if you pay for it. Regardless if you pay for an air purifier of the whole entire world. Like imagine the whole entire world just has like air that's really good. You can't just stop someone from breathing air, it's just everywhere. So now, which of the following is excludable? Well, your answer is going to be Netflix subscription, because people can be excluded from receiving the benefits of the Netflix subscription if they don't pay for it. Which of the following goods is rival? So what's the definition of a rival good? A rival good is a good that is a good that if somebody uses it, it reduces the availability for others. So let's take a pizza slice. If you eat that pizza slice, then it's going to decrease the amount of pizza available for other people. You have one pizza. You take a slice, it's going to be less pizza for someone else. Weather forecast, that doesn't even make sense. Streaming service, there's the movies. You can just keep watching the movie again. National defense, if you use it, it doesn't decrease like national defense because it's kind of negligible to make a impact. So you're going to say pizza for this one. Now, negative externalities cause what? What is a negative externality again? So this happens when a third party not involved in the transaction suffers a cost. And that's going to lead to overproduction. So for example, let's take factory pollution. Negative externalities are going to cause overproduction because when you have pollution, it is going to cause an overproduction of something because the third party is going to suffer to that cost. Now, a positive externality is going to result in underproduction. And this is when a third party receives a benefit. There's no incentive for them to produce more of something because they're not taking part in that transaction, and they're just receiving the benefit from other people doing it, so they're less encouraged to do that thing. So let's take like vaccines. When you have vaccines, you receive the benefit of other people taking that vaccine. So you yourself are likely to be inclined to think that vaccines don't work or something, or vaccines are something that you don't want to get because you receive the benefit of vaccines, but you don't know about it. The reason why you don't want to get a vaccine is because they work so well that you don't see the benefits of them in action because it's a positive externality. And let's say, like, most of the world is vaccinated, so it prevents a lot of diseases like smallpox from occurring. And because you don't see those are just unseen, so then you don't get the vaccine. Now, so that's going to cause an underuse of the vaccines. Now, for the negative externalities, it's going to cause factory pollution, so it's going to cause a third party to suffer a cost. So you can think like they're going to keep on using those factories because it's going to produce a harm to the environment, and they're not really facing it. The environment's not a player in that game. So for positive externalities, it's going to be B, an underproduction. Overproduction occurs when what? So this has to do with resource allocation. And resource allocation is efficient when your marginal benefit is equal to your marginal cost. You're going to have overproduction when your marginal cost is greater than your marginal benefit. And you're going to have underproduction when your marginal benefit is greater than your marginal cost. So, for example, when you have pollution, your marginal cost, social, is going to be greater than your marginal benefit. So, overproduction, it occurs, marginal cost is greater than marginal benefit. Socially optimized output occurs when socially optimal is when your margin MSB is equal to MSC. Marginal social benefit is equal to your marginal social cost. And this includes external costs, benefits. So for example, this occurs B. Tragedy of commons. So, tragedy of commons. So, tragedy of commons, that occurs when you have overfishing. Overfishing is going to harm the ocean, even though the ocean's not a player in this transaction, really. And this is going to be because these goods are so non-excludable. They're non-excludable, meaning that you can't prevent people from really taking advantage of them. So people just keep using them because they are going to ignore those external costs. And it's going to cause a con for the ocean. It's bad for the ocean. And it happens because the individuals ignore the social costs. Coase theorem. This is going to be For example, Close theorem is going to clearly define property rights. So property rights is what's important.